Welcome to the Geoengineering Report, where we identify the threat in the skies. Everywhere we look, there are noticeable changes in the weather, soaring extinction rates in insects and animals, and what seems to be never-ending problems with the food supply. But for many, it is hard to believe what is right in front of our own eyes, because so few news outlets are connecting the puzzle pieces of what is causing these symptoms. So today we are going to take a look at how geoengineering might manipulate these and why. If you're new here, feel free to go back and watch the first episode in this series, linked in the description.
How do they manipulate the weather and why? Yeah, we're seeing crazy hailstones, we're seeing hurricanes out of control, heat all over the place. The weather is crazy.
There are multiple parts of the equation that are affecting that, but the intentional intervention, the worst of all, on the hailstones, that's called chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. They're seeding clouds with endothermic reacting elements. These are patented processes that causes ice to nucleate at much higher than normal temperatures. That nucleation builds up very fast. Why would they do this? They're causing flash surface cool downs from record heat to very cold temperatures on the surface sometimes. Here's one example. 2013, Amarillo, Texas, May 1st, 2013, it was 100 degrees on the ground, all-time record high. It snowed the next day. Anyone who thinks that's nature needs to wake up and face reality. So we have the ability to engineer surface cool downs, chemically engineered surface cool downs, and that's what's happening. That's why the hailstones are so big. I encourage your listeners to search the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org or search Lake Michigan ice balls. They operate with these processes over the Great Lakes often, creating massive ice balls that wash up on the shore, 75-pound perfectly spherical ice balls covering the shorelines. Who could possibly think that that's nature? That's happening on the Arctic shores, Baltic Sea. So we have so many different aspects of these operations that are affecting climate, weather. On the cyclonic rotations, Paula, you've seen how many tornadoes there's been this year. So when moisture is manipulated in from the West Coast and migrating across the U.S. toward the east, and that is chemically nucleated, creating a cold, dense layer of air on the surface that collides with warm, moist air that's being manipulated up from the Gulf of Mexico. Those colliding air masses generate cyclonic rotations. So though you can't point at any specific single tornado and say geoengineering did that, what we can say is that the conditions that spawned these rotations are absolutely directly connected to climate engineering. Same with wildfires. Climate engineering is establishing the conditions to allow those fires to burn with such ferocity. Source of ignition, separate subject, different issue. But what's establishing the conditions for fueling so much climate chaos? And it's all inseparable from climate engineering, Polly.
Can you talk about aluminum and how that aids in this weather control?
Aluminum is named in climate engineering patents. It was named by the world's most recognized climate engineer, Dr. David Keith, in a 2010 global geoengineering conference, which I attended. This is on film, on the record, in our groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, available for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. You can see the world's most recognized geoengineer when confronted by me at this conference as to had any toxicological studies been done at their advocating the dumping of tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the sky annually as part of climate engineering operations. Had any toxicological studies been done? And he first stumbled and tried to answer by saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that they studied atmospheric particulate loading, a lot of particles in the air anyway, a little more won't hurt. And I countered with, those particles are not aluminum. Have you specifically studied aluminum? For those that don't know, bioavailable aluminum is toxic to all life, period. No exceptions. Dr. Keith then stated, well, no, we haven't studied aluminum. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. How could a scientist of that caliber not know that dumping tens of millions of tons of toxic aluminum nanoparticles, again, that are absorbed into everything because they're bioavailable, everything we eat, drink, breathe, how could he possibly not know that that will do immense and irreparable harm? So what I would argue here is, again, all of these layers overlap, that yes, manipulating the weather allows them to control food supplies, thus control populations. And as the populations are building up more and more of this material in their systems, that is doing neurological damage. It is making us literally dumber by the day. And that certainly serves those in power as well. A population that's struggling with its health and not thinking clearly is certainly easier to control. So there's so many layers to this, Polly, and let me end with this. The beginning of every weekly geoengineeringwatch.org global alert news broadcast, all news, no politics, is a short film clip of President Lyndon Johnson, former US President Lyndon Johnson, in 1962, again, 62 years ago, stating like a lunatic on film and on the record that we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and quote, "He who controls the weather controls the world," for all the reasons I've already cited. So again, I would encourage people to understand that if we don't deal with this, all other causes and concerns will soon become moot.
Can you explain what HARP is, please?
HARP, that's High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. That's what the acronym stands for. And that acronym is meant to be confusing and not really to mean anything to anyone. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's an ionosphere heater. And that is one of many around the globe. HARP is the biggest, and it's used to manipulate atmospheric pressure zones. How does it do that? And people think this is some sort of science fiction conclusion. It's solid, indisputed science. So the HARP facility, and your listeners can look this up and see the images online, can transmit about 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, which causes an electrical chain reaction, which heats the atmosphere to extraordinarily high temperatures, causing it to expand up and down. The downward push of that heated atmosphere causes a high pressure heat dome on the ground. And they can park those heat domes anywhere they want for as long as they want. Multiple purposes for that. Again, I would argue crushing agriculture is part of a clear agenda at this point. We see flash freezes, flash flood, flash drought, flash heat, destroying agriculture. France just had their vineyards wiped out with massive hailstones. It's happening everywhere. There's too many instances to even begin to cite. But that's one aspect of the manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. And for example, in the Northern Hemisphere, this is what's happening right now over the US West. Massive high pressure heat dome. Again, many layers for what they do. Everything they do has multiple agendas and objectives. So this high pressure heat dome rotates the upper level wind currents clockwise around it. That's the case in all Northern Hemisphere high pressure heat domes. So there's a very radically negative effect on agriculture. It's wiping it out here. Photosynthesis, for those that don't know, stops at 104 degrees. Tapers down very quickly up to that point. When nights don't cool down, there's no growth happening in plants, crops, forests, nothing. So it's curtailing agricultural production, but it's also rotating the Pacific moisture and cooler air up and over the US West and back down into other portions of the US where they're creating these short-term chemical cool downs in the most populated portions of the US. And that convinces those members of the population there can't be anything wrong with the climate because look how cold it is outside my door. Sure, it was record warm a week ago, but now it's cold, so there can't be any warming anymore in the planet, and that's a very myopic view. The eastern half of the lower 48 of the U.S. is less than 1% of the Earth's surface area, but people who live in those areas think if it's a certain condition outside their door, it must be that way everywhere, so they keep the wedge driven into society, dividing and confusing populations as to the true state of the climate and the damage to it. Also, right now, in spite of the off-the-chart record heat in the whole western North American continent, Alaska has had below normal temperatures because, again, all of this cooler air and moisture being rotated up and over this high-pressure heat dome, being chemically nucleated, is cooling Alaska. They're trying to mask the warming of the Arctic at the cost of making the overall situation worse. So, again, so many layers to this equation, to what's happening, but it's a runaway train, Polly, of total insanity, and we will all soon pay the price if it continues.
Thank you for that. Can we just go for the average person? They're seeing the skies are sprayed. What is happening? The particles coming down. Is it? They're breathing it in. They're inhaling it. It's on the plants. It's on the trees. It's on your beautiful potatoes or whatever it is that are sprouting out of the ground. It's just getting into everything. So how can you recognize geoengineering damage? Number one, and number two, what can we do to protect ourselves? What do you do to protect yourself against this?
Let me back into the equation. Constant chelation is absolutely necessary. We have to keep these particles moving through our system or they will build up and do much more damage than they already are. So chelation is essential. I would encourage people to talk to a nutritionalist. That needs to be done very carefully and methodically. In regard to recognizing what is an aerosol cloud in our sky and what's a natural cloud, it's not hard to do. The aerosol clouds are filthy, dirty, wispy, not defined. Once you know what you're looking at, it is shockingly obvious, and it is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the equation, because as this damage to the atmosphere manifests, the planet's natural cloud making ability is starting to wane rapidly. And if we reach the end of that road, we're done. It's called Venus syndrome. Planet's a true sister to Venus. It creates a runaway event. Again, people don't know this. All things being equal, Venus would be about 20 degrees warmer than Earth. People think it's 900 degrees on the surface because it's so close to the sun. That's not the case. Only 20 degrees difference, and we're already a significant way across that gap with the warming that's already occurring. So the premise of solar radiation management, I just want to put this into context, is to increase the Earth's albedo, its reflectivity, the reflectivity of the atmosphere. So let's put this into perspective. Venus has 2.5 times the albedo of Earth. Did that help Venus? Is Venus cool? No, because it's trapping far more heat than it reflects, and we have a superheated surface, and we are on that exact same road. The entire stated premise for climate engineering operations to slow the warming of the planet is completely flawed, and we have so-called academia pretending that these programs are just a proposal, a last-ditch potential option to slow the warming of the planet, when we know after 75 plus years of this, it's done nothing but harm. So again, as far as what's settling down on our crops and so forth, Polly, we know this from peer-reviewed science study. Your listeners can find this online. There's not a single uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth right now. Peer-reviewed study to prove it, from the North Pole to the South Pole, top of Mount Everest. Every single drop of rain is contaminated, and not just with any elements. They're not even looking for or acknowledging climate engineering elements, which makes the equation worse still. But we're talking about PFAS forever chemicals in every single drop of rain, which means it's in everything else. It's building up in all of us. There's more medical data by the day to confirm this. And I'm not omitting all the countless sources of human pollution. Again, where would I start? The list is endless. There's 15,000 PFAS forever chemicals, and there's several 100,000 chemicals produced by man that are everywhere in our environment. But the intentional dispersion of the elements I've described make the equation exponentially worse. So the bottom line, there is nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, and our time is, again, rapidly running out.
Are there any states that have banned this? And should we be going and lobbying and screaming at our politicians, or is that pointless?
The whole political system is bought, sold, and paid for, with a few exceptions. And in the case of Tennessee, that did recently pass legislation banning climate engineering operations, some very honorable individuals there, Congressman Sutherland and Representative Monty Fritz, very honorable individuals. I've had extensive communication with Monty Fritz, and we need more like them. They made a very simple template for creating this legislation other states should follow. We're communicating with a number of other states right now. And why this matters is it puts this issue on the radar, and that is the only way forward in this fight. Legislation will not stop something that is considered a, quote, national security issue. They're not going to stop from a lawsuit. Only when the public takes to the streets, again, with the proverbial pitchforks and torches, and thus brings this issue to so much awareness that those participating, and this is key, those participating in these programs, aka our military brothers and sisters, who are being told they're doing something for the greater good, which could not be further from the truth. They need to wake up. Their families need to wake up, understand what they're doing to themselves and their own posterity, so that we can stop these programs from the inside out, while there's still some portion of the planet's life support systems to salvage. And I can't express with enough urgency how immediate our situation is. People think that the types of environmental collapse catastrophes I'm alluding to are perhaps centuries or decades away. They're here now, kicking in the front door now. That Haiti is basically a Mad Max scenario failed state. We have about 36 countries following in that exact path right now. There's not enough to eat, literally. And we have the intervention of empires like the US empire in those situations, making them worse. It's always been the case. Again, 800 U.S. military bases around the world. They're not in countries because those countries love us so much they want to send us their resources while they starve. That's not how it works. They're sending us their resources at the point of a gun, literally, in so many ways. So what people don't understand is the gravity of what's unfolding and how fast it will manifest once it can't be hidden from populations. And I would argue that could come at any point now. And at that point, here's what I would ask. If those in power, who are power addicts, who literally, based on clinical analysis, don't comprehend the consequences of their actions, even to themselves, we're not dealing with sanity, why would we think, given their history and their actions, that once they can't hide the severity of what they've done, the severity of what's unfolding, the severity of our common predicament, why would we think that they wouldn't disperse something much more lethal in the mechanism they already have, fully deployed, climate engineering operations dispersing these aerosols with elements like graphene and polymer fibers? Why would we think they wouldn't use this already established mechanism to deploy something like Marburg or Ebola, hemorrhagic fevers with 90% mortality rates, to level the playing field? I would argue, of course they would, and they may if we don't stop them first.
Okay, so someone actually said this to me. So what do you say to someone like this? They said, Polly, it's ridiculous. There's no such thing as geoengineering. If they were spraying poison in the skies, the birds would drop out of the skies dead.
Well, in fact, in many regions, the birds are falling out of the skies dead. And there's, some of those instances may be related to the type of atmospheric frequency manipulation I'm speaking about. But let's go back to the current species extinction rate right now. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day to extinction. That's 15,000 times the background rate. That's 1.5% of normal. Nothing normal about that. So we do see this effect, this ripple effect in the environment. This is a very slow and insidious scenario. They're not spraying anthrax or anything like that yet that would cause some sort of instant mortality. But the bottom line is, it is absolutely happening. Anybody who does any research on bird populations, for example, let alone insect populations, which is the true canary in the coal mine, again, right now, insects very susceptible to this type of insidious particle pollution. Global insect populations down 80 to 90% right now. So when people make that kind of response, this can't be happening because of some element they cite, they wouldn't do this to themselves, or everything would be dead already. None of that's true. And I would encourage those people to actually do research, to believe what they see with their own eyes, what they can feel with their own senses, the intense ozone layer scenario, the record of the military industrial complex doing what they do. Again, the 239 exposed open air biological tests over U.S. populations as far back as 1977, according to the Washington Post, that's who cited that data. How much more have they done since then? And for those that think that if this was going on, we'd certainly hear from everybody, Polly, I want to drive this point home because I know this is your area of expertise. How much of a massive field of so-called experts, the medical industrial complex, still cling to the, quote, safe and effective mantra in spite of mountains of data? I know that hits home for you, and I'm very grateful for all your work, all the work at CHD. But is that not a harbinger of how much people will conform to whatever they're trained to conform to in spite of the consequences?
We hear that a lot. A little bit of aluminum is safe and effective. You're fine. Everyone's fine. No. Okay, and I want to say to our viewers listening now that if you have a question for Dane, then please send it into the Good Morning CHD email address, and I will ask Dane those questions when I next am with him. But Dane, what have I missed here? What else do the people need to know? Anything current right now that we need to be looking at or be aware of?
The bottom line is, I would encourage people to understand that the threat posed by what's happening in our skies is not somewhere off over the horizon. It's kicking in the front door right now. It's affecting every single breath we take. These elements are building up in our system. It's killing soils, soil microbiome, root systems, forests. The ramifications are incredibly grave and incredibly extensive. Please help us in this battle.
Dane, thank you for all the work you're doing to alert us. Thank God for you. And I know our viewers will keep doing their research on geoengineeringwatch.org. And we will be doing these broadcasts as often as we can, because Dane is a very busy man, obviously. But we will be doing these on CHD TV with Dane on a regular basis, because Dane, the people need to know, and they want to know as well about it. And they also want to know what to do. And I know that's the hard bit.
How do you move this fight forward? And people underestimate their own power. And this is what I tried to instill at the end of our groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which again is the single most important tool that people can share for free from their own home computer, sending the link to The Dimming to elected officials, environmental groups, agricultural groups, everyone that needs to know. And that list is incredibly long. And at the end of The Dimming, the editor for the film captured what I wanted to express to the world, that any one of us could be the final grain of sand that triggers the landslide of awakening. And people need to never forget how much power they have to start a spot fire of awareness and to stoke that fire. And if we start enough of these fires and they merge into a blaze that can't be extinguished, we can put this issue in the full light of day. And if we can do that, Polly, the wheels in the battle will turn on their own, as so many people in so many places, just like the Air Force generals in The Dimming, realize that they are going down with the ship as well. And now we have an army of the awakened, and only then do we have a chance of truly stopping these programs from the inside out. And that effort will take all of us. All of us are essential in that equation. All of us spokes in the wheel. All of us necessary to make it turn.
Thank you to everyone who sent in images of geoengineering in their areas. Here are a few we received. We would love to know what's happening in the skies around you. Send geoengineering photos and questions to goodmorningchd@childrenshealthdefense.org. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Geoengineering Report.
The deepest and most untraveled wilderness has always been my sanctuary. And when I trek there alone and in solitude, I feel most connected to the whole. I marvel at the complexity and the miraculousness of life, the countless forms of it. I try to contemplate the endless and seemingly impossible factors that were necessary for life to exist and flourish on this spinning ball of rock in the harsh and hostile environment of space. A ball of rock with its own magnetic shield, with its own moon that stabilizes its orbit, that orbits a life-giving star at just the right distance, with miraculous atmospheric layers that, for unimaginably long spans of time, have facilitated countless forms of life. How wondrous it all is, each part. A dragonfly, a tree, a bird, a whale, the sunrise, millions of tons of water magically floating through the sky in the form of spellbindingly beautiful clouds, bringing life-giving rain. When I witness the destruction of this miraculous web of life, I can only think of returning to the front line of the battle to sound the alarm. Reaching a critical mass of awareness in the population is the only way forward in this fight.
The challenges we face are immense. The odds are against us. But as the proverb goes, it's not over till it's over. Any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening.